My name is Isabella Rossi, and I was 25 years old when life began to feel like an endless war I could never win. Every morning I woke up before the sun, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The alarm would scream at 5:30 a.m., and I would drag myself out of bed to start my first shift at the coffee shop on 6th Street. By noon, I'd rush home, change, and head straight to the second job, waiting tables at a downtown diner that smelled like burnt oil and tired dreams. I didn't have the luxury to rest. I had school loans to pay off, massive ones, the kind that follow you like a shadow even when you're trying to breathe. But more than anything, I had my mother to care for. She was sick, really sick, and needed special treatment. The kind of treatment that only rich people could afford, with specialists who didn't take insurance and medicine that cost more than rent. Rent, bills, medical supplies, groceries. It was all a constant math problem I never quite solved. Some weeks I skipped meals just so I could afford her prescriptions. And even when I sat down for 5 minutes, my mind never rested. I was always calculating. How many hours do I need to work to cover the electric bill? Can I delay the phone bill another week? What if mom's condition gets worse? I was always tired. Not the kind of tired that goes away with sleep. No, this was the deep, bone-level exhaustion, the kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything feel heavy. My dreams had shrunk to small wishes. A quiet night, a full fridge, no calls from debt collectors. I didn't think about vacations or love or futures anymore. Just survival. Then one Friday evening, everything changed. I didn't plan to go out. I rarely did. But that night, my friend Lisa, my only real friend from college, begged me to come with her to a party. "You need a break," she said. "Just come. Just for a little while. It'll be good for you." I didn't even have anything nice to wear. Everything in my closet was old, faded, or bought secondhand. In the end, I wore a simple black dress that didn't quite fit right and borrowed a pair of heels that pinched my toes. I felt awkward before we even arrived. The party was in a mansion, a real one with high ceilings, marble floors, and glittering lights that made everything sparkle. I had never seen a place like that up close. It felt like a movie set. Everyone there looked like they belonged. Polished, elegant, rich. Their clothes screamed designer labels. Their smiles were perfect and practiced. I stuck close to Lisa, sipping cheap wine from a crystal glass, trying to pretend like I wasn't drowning in shame over my thrift store dress. Then I saw him. Across the room, standing like a shadow among diamonds, was a man in a dark suit. He was tall, confident, and didn't smile. He didn't need to. Everything about him said power. The way people moved around him, careful, respectful, told me he wasn't just rich. He was someone important, and he was staring at me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone stood behind me. I even turned to check, but no, his eyes were on me. Cold, unreadable, intense. I looked away quickly, embarrassed. What could a man like him possibly want from someone like me? After the party ended, it had started to rain, heavy and cold. Lisa had already left with someone she knew, and I was about to walk to the nearest bus stop when I heard a voice behind me. "Do you need a ride home?" I turned around. It was him, Mr. Thomas Sterling. His voice was deep, smooth, and firm. He didn't ask twice. I nodded before my brain could even process what was happening. The truth was, I didn't want to walk in the rain, and maybe, for once, I wanted to feel like someone saw me. His car was sleek and black, definitely the most expensive thing I had ever sat in. The leather seats were soft, and the air smelled like something expensive I couldn't name. He didn't talk much at first, just silence and the sound of the rain on the windows. Then, without looking at me, he asked, "Are you hungry?" I hadn't eaten since noon, but I shook my head. He ignored me. Minutes later, we pulled up to a beautiful restaurant, one with gold door handles and a man in a suit who opened the car door for me. Inside, everything was velvet and candlelight. The food was unreal. I had no idea what to do with half the silverware on the table. I tried not to look nervous. He barely spoke, but he kept watching me, like he was studying me. Then, after the plates were cleared, he leaned forward. "Isabella?" he said, his voice low and steady. "I see that your life is hard. I'm a rich man. I live alone. Sometimes I want company. I can give you money, a lot of money. You'll never have to work 2 jobs again. Your mother can get the best doctors. You won't have to worry anymore." I froze. It didn't feel real. It felt like one of those dreams I used to have before I learned better. But I saw the way he looked at me, like I was an investment, like this was a deal. He wasn't offering love. He was offering escape from all of it. And right then, I didn't know if I should be terrified or tempted. But I knew one thing for sure. If I said yes, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I don't know what I expected after that dinner. Maybe a polite goodbye, an awkward thank you, then silence forever. But Mr. Sterling didn't seem like the type of man who did anything halfway. That night was not a one-time gesture. It was the beginning of something much bigger. As we left the restaurant, the rain had calmed to a soft drizzle, and he walked me to the car without saying much. The silence between us was thick, not uncomfortable, but charged, like we both knew something unspoken was about to happen. Inside the car, the world outside felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. He looked straight ahead, fingers tapping the steering wheel with practiced stillness. Then he turned slightly toward me and said, without ceremony, "Come with me." That was it. No explanations, no details, just those 3 words. "Come with you?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "To my home," he said. "There are things I want to discuss in private." Part of me screamed to say no. This man was a stranger, rich, intense, and clearly used to getting his way. But the other part of me, the tired, broke, desperate part, wanted to know what he meant. Something told me this wasn't about romance or attraction. It was about something else. His home was unlike anything I'd seen outside of magazines. A massive estate on the edge of the city, with iron gates, stone fountains, and tall glass windows that glowed like fire in the night. The inside was even more surreal. Marble floors, polished wood, art that probably cost more than my entire education. He led me to a sitting room that looked like it belonged in a palace. I sat on a velvet sofa, unsure of what to do with my hands, while he poured 2 glasses of wine. He handed me one, then sat across from me. "I won't waste your time," he said. "You're struggling. I can see it. You're working yourself into the ground. You're trying to take care of your mother. You're drowning." His words hit too close. I felt seen, exposed. "How do you know all that?" "I pay attention," he said simply. "You're not the kind of woman who belongs in a diner or a coffee shop. You belong somewhere better. But you've been given nothing. I can change that." He leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I can give you money, enough that you never worry again. Your mother can have private care, top doctors. You'll live in comfort. You won't need to work a single day unless you choose to." I stared at him. It was the kind of offer people joked about, the stuff of fairy tales or movies where the mysterious billionaire swoops in and saves the struggling girl. But this didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt real and dangerous. "Why?" I asked, my voice quiet. He looked at me for a long moment. "Because I want someone in my life. Not a wife, not a lover, just someone, a companion, someone I can trust to be near. I don't have family, I don't want love, I want loyalty, presence, nothing more." It sounded cold, clinical, like a business deal, not a relationship. "What would I have to do?" I asked. "Be there, live with me, follow my rules, no questions about my business, no lies, and complete loyalty. In return, I'll take care of you." The way he spoke made it sound simple, like he was offering a job. But I knew it was more complicated than that. He stood up and walked over to a drawer. He pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a contract, clear, legal, specific. It laid out everything. I would live with him, be his companion, receive a generous monthly allowance. I couldn't speak about our arrangement to anyone, and I would agree not to interfere in his personal or professional affairs. My hand trembled slightly as I read it. The terms were generous, even overwhelming. It was more money than I could make in 5 years working 2 jobs. It would cover my mother's care, every bill, every debt. It would give us both peace, but it felt like I was selling something. My time, my silence, maybe even my freedom. He watched me, quiet, unreadable. "I'm not forcing you," he said. "You can walk away tonight. Nothing changes. But if you stay, this life is yours. Security, comfort, freedom from struggle." I thought of my mother lying in her bed at home, coughing weakly in the night. I thought of the past 3 years of exhaustion and fear. I thought of the bills stacked on my tiny kitchen table. And I thought of this man, cold, calculating, but offering a lifeline. "I don't love you," I said softly. "I don't want you to," he replied. I stared at the contract one last time, then picked up the pen he had laid beside it. With a deep breath, I signed my name. The morning I moved into Mr. Sterling's estate, the sun hung low over the hills, casting golden light across the driveway like a warm welcome, or a warning. My belongings fit into 2 duffel bags and 1 cardboard box. It felt almost shameful, how little I had to my name. But no one said anything. The housekeeper, a woman named Elise with kind eyes and a voice like silk, took my bags and led me through the towering front doors as if I were expected, as if I belonged. Inside, everything smelled of lavender and old wood. The house was silent, too silent, like it was waiting to see what kind of person I would become in its shadow. Mr. Sterling wasn't there to greet me. A note was left on the console table in the grand foyer, handwritten in his sharp, angular script. Welcome. Make yourself at home. You'll find a wardrobe prepared for you upstairs. Dinner at 7. Just his initials. No warmth, no smiley face, just a man who treated life like business. Upstairs, I found a wing that had clearly been designed for me. A full suite, bedroom, sitting room, private bath. The closet was already stocked with clothes, designer labels all perfectly tailored to my measurements. I hadn't told him my sizes. I didn't need to. He somehow knew. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed and stared at the open window. The air smelled of pine and rain. This was not my world, not even close. But it was mine now, at least for as long as I kept my part of the deal. Dinner was in a formal dining room with ceilings so high they seemed to swallow sound. The table stretched far too long for just 2 people, but he sat close, a few chairs down. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and greeted me with a nod. "You settled in?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, thank you for everything." He studied me for a moment. "You're not used to gratitude." "No, not like this." He didn't smile. I wasn't sure he even knew how. "This house has rules," he said. "You may go where you please, except for the West Wing and my office. You'll have full access to the library, garden, gym, and pool. A driver is available if you need to go into the city. Discretion is expected at all times. Understood?" I nodded again. Understood. He poured a glass of wine and slid it toward me. "Do you drink?" "Only when I don't have to wake up at 5 in the morning." His eyebrow twitched, just slightly. "You won't need to anymore." Dinner was quiet after that. Steak, vegetables, a glass of something French I couldn't pronounce. He didn't ask about my past. He didn't make small talk. He simply existed beside me, like a presence too large to ignore. After the dishes were cleared, he stood. "Tomorrow, we'll talk more. About routines. Boundaries." I stood too. "Is there anything you expect of me tonight?" He looked at me, long, deliberate. "No, you're not here to entertain me. You're here to be present. That's all." Then he walked away, disappearing down the corridor like a ghost in an expensive suit. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. It creaked and sighed like it had secrets. I wondered what kind of man Mr. Sterling really was. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind either. He was disciplined, measured. Like someone who had built walls so high around himself, he forgot what it felt like to let someone in. In the days that followed, I slipped into a rhythm. Mornings started late, with breakfast served quietly by Elise. I spent hours in the library, where leather-bound books stretched up 20-foot walls and smelled like old stories. Afternoons were mine. Walks through the garden, swims in the heated pool, silence interrupted only by the occasional piano melody drifting from somewhere in the house. I never saw who played. Mr. Sterling and I shared dinners most nights, though we rarely spoke beyond pleasantries. I learned to read him through silence. A twitch of the jaw meant he was distracted. A second glass of wine meant something had gone wrong that day. A long pause before speaking meant I had asked something I shouldn't. But slowly, things shifted. One night, he asked what my favorite book was. Another night, he offered me a rare smile when I made a joke about the absurd size of the house. These were small cracks in his armor, but they were there. Then came the first real test. I woke early one morning to voices outside my room. Tense, urgent. "Elise, is something wrong?" I asked, stepping out. She hesitated. "Mr. Sterling, he's gone to the West Wing. He doesn't like to be disturbed when he's in that state." "That state?" I echoed. Her lips tightened. "He gets like this sometimes, after certain phone calls. It's best to give him space." I should have walked away, but curiosity and something else pushed me forward. I crept quietly toward the West Wing door, the one I'd been told to avoid, and I heard him, not shouting, crying. A sound so raw, so human, it didn't belong in a house like this. I stepped back slowly, heart pounding. Mr. Sterling had a past. And whether I wanted to or not, I was beginning to live inside it. Living in Mr. Sterling's world was like entering a parallel universe. There were rules, routines, and a rhythm I had to learn, but none of them were written down. It was the kind of place where silence said more than words, and every small action held weight. At first, everything felt surreal. The house was too quiet, too perfect. Meals were prepared by staff I barely saw. My clothes were replaced by expensive, tailored outfits that showed up in my closet without request. Every morning, a schedule was placed outside my door, even though I had no obligations. I could sleep in, swim in the indoor pool, read in the glass library. I had freedom, but with invisible strings. Mr. Sterling was always present but distant. He would join me for dinner most evenings, dressed impeccably in dark suits, his silver watch always gleaming. We talked, but only about surface things: books, art, travel. He never mentioned his business, and I never asked. That was part of the agreement. Still, I couldn't help but wonder. His phone would ring, and he would leave the room. Some nights, he wouldn't return until morning. I pretended not to notice. But slowly, things began to shift. One night, we were in the music room. He sat at the grand piano, fingers moving over the keys with haunting precision. I had no idea he could play. The music filled the space, and for a moment, he looked younger, softer, vulnerable even. "You're good," I said. He didn't respond right away. Then, with a hint of something that almost resembled emotion, he said, "My mother used to play." It was the first time he'd mentioned family. I didn't push. After that, he started to let down his guard in small ways. He'd join me on the balcony in the mornings, sipping coffee in silence. Once he brought me a book he thought I'd like, without me ever mentioning my favorite genre. Another time, I found him standing outside my door in the middle of the night. He didn't say why, just looked at me for a long moment before walking away. It was confusing. This wasn't love, at least, not the kind I recognized. It was closer to obsession, or maybe loneliness disguised as control. He needed me near, but not too close. He wanted connection, but only on his terms. Some days I felt like a guest, others like a prisoner. And yet, I stayed. One evening, I made dinner myself. Nothing fancy, just pasta, a bottle of red wine, and candles I found in one of the guest rooms. When he came in and saw the setup, he paused. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "No staff tonight?" he asked. "Just us," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He sat across from me, unusually quiet. Halfway through the meal, he said, "No one's ever done this for me." I didn't know what to say, so I reached across the table and touched his hand. His fingers closed around mine tightly, as if afraid I'd disappear. Later that night, he told me about his past. Not everything, but enough to understand why he built walls so high. His father had been powerful and cruel. His mother, elegant and sad. He'd been alone since his early 20s, using money as armor, control as protection. Love had betrayed him once, and he never let it near again. Now I understood why he drafted contracts instead of making promises. But knowing this didn't make things easier. One morning, I woke up to find him gone. No note, no message, just silence. It lasted 3 days. I wandered the halls, ate alone, slept restlessly. My anxiety returned like an old friend. When he finally walked through the door, calm and composed, I was furious. "Where were you?" I demanded. His expression didn't change. "I told you not to ask questions about my business." "That's not what I'm asking," I said. "I'm not asking about your business. I'm asking if I matter." Something shifted in his eyes then. Guilt? Pain? Regret? "You shouldn't," he said flatly, "but you do." That was the problem. We were tangled in something that had no name. Not love, not partnership. A strange blend of transaction and tenderness. I couldn't walk away, not yet. But I also couldn't pretend I didn't feel something deeper creeping in. He never said he loved me. I never asked him to. But sometimes I would wake up in the night and feel his hand brushing mine in the dark. Just enough to know he was there. Just enough to know he needed me. Our relationship wasn't romantic, it wasn't clean, but it was real in its own way. Flawed, fragile, and built on unspoken needs. And deep down, I think we both knew. This was never meant to last. But we were too afraid to let go. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Quiet, gray, and uneventful, like most days in that house. I was in the West Wing, a part of the mansion I rarely entered, following the scent of something strange, burnt paper, faint and bitter. At first, I thought it might be nothing, but the further I walked, the stronger it became, leading me to a door I had never noticed before. It wasn't locked. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the filtered light through half-drawn curtains. It looked like an office, but not one that was used regularly. Dust lined the bookshelves, the rug was worn in certain spots, and an old ashtray sat untouched on the mahogany desk. On the corner of that desk was a metal tray, and in it the charred remains of papers recently burned. The ash was still warm. That's when I saw it. A single corner of paper that hadn't been fully destroyed. I reached for it, my hands shaking slightly. What I read in those last few unburned lines stopped my breath. Transfer complete. The girl believes it's just companionship. She must never know. I stood frozen, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The girl. That had to be me. And what transfer? Of money? Of power? Of ownership? I put the fragment back where I found it and quickly left the room. That night at dinner, I sat across from Mr. Sterling, trying to hide the chaos inside me. He talked about an upcoming charity gala, the weather, some rare wine shipment arriving from France. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, but I barely heard a word. He was hiding something. And now I knew, but I couldn't confront him. Not yet, not without knowing the full truth. So I began watching more closely. What he did, what he didn't say when he left, and who he avoided mentioning. It wasn't long before I noticed the second strange thing. He had a room he kept locked at all times, on the 3rd floor. The door looked ordinary, white paint, brass handle, but I'd never seen anyone go in or out. No staff, not even him, as far as I could tell. Until one night. I woke to use the bathroom around 2 a.m., and on my way back to bed, I heard soft footsteps above me. I crept to the base of the stairs and peered upward. Mr. Sterling was walking out of that room, barefoot, shirtless, holding what looked like a photograph. He paused at the top of the stairs, his eyes unfocused like he was seeing something I couldn't. Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, when I asked him how he'd slept, he said, "Like a rock." A lie. Days passed, and the tension inside me grew. I felt like I was living in 2 realities. One where I was the chosen companion of a mysterious man with expensive tastes, and another where I was just a pawn in a deeper game I didn't understand. I began to search the house in secret, choosing hours when I knew he was away. I didn't know what I was looking for. Answers, maybe? Evidence. Something to connect the dots. And eventually, I found it. In the back of a locked drawer in the study, which I picked open with the help of a bent hairpin, I found an envelope. Inside were surveillance photos. Of me. At first, I didn't believe it. But there I was, walking to work, shopping for groceries, sitting at the hospital beside my mother. Dozens of photos, all taken before the night I met him. He'd been watching me, long before the party, long before the offer. The room spun. My chest tightened. Suddenly, everything made sense, and made nothing make sense at all. Why me? Why not someone else? When he came home that evening, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't sit across from him at dinner without hearing the words in my head. She must never know. I wasn't just a companion. I was part of something much darker. Later that night, I stood outside his bedroom door, hand hovering over the knob. I wanted to confront him, demand the truth, but the words refused to come. I was scared of what he'd say and of what I'd do once I heard it. So I walked away, down the hall, past the grand staircase, into the garden, where the night air cooled the panic burning beneath my skin. For the first time since I entered his world, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't free. I never had been. And the scariest part wasn't the lies. It was the feeling that somewhere deep inside, a part of me didn't want to leave. Because despite everything, despite the secrets, the manipulation, the shadows, I was already too far gone. And this was only the first secret. It wasn't a proposal, not in the traditional sense. There were no flowers, no down-on-one-knee moment, no trembling hands or teary eyes. Instead, Mr. Sterling placed a folded document in front of me during breakfast, beside my coffee. "This," he said calmly, "is a marriage agreement. All terms are negotiable, except the destination." I stared at the paper, steam rising from my cup, his words still echoing in my mind. Marriage? We weren't even dating in the conventional sense. What we had was complicated, luxurious, intense. But legal? I didn't touch the document. What do you mean, the destination? He didn't blink. We'll move to Geneva within 2 months. I have business there. It's safer, quieter, you'll like it. I looked down at the contract, the soft rustle of paper sounding louder than it should have. The first page bore both our names. The second, terms. Financial assets, discretion clauses, even stipulations for public appearances. And then, at the bottom of the third page, something that made my throat tighten. Clause 9. Emotional involvement is not required nor expected. Clause 10. The marriage will be terminated upon mutual agreement or after 5 years. 5 years, like a prison sentence but with champagne. Is this a convenience marriage? I asked. He gave a small smile, unreadable as ever. It's a protection arrangement for both of us. Marriage affords legal privileges. I have enemies, Isabella. You'd be safer as my wife. He said my name like it mattered to him, like it tasted expensive on his tongue. And maybe it did. Do you love me? I asked before I could stop myself. Silence stretched between us. Then he said, softly, love is unpredictable, dangerous even. This isn't about love. Of course it wasn't. I stood, pushing the chair back slowly. Then what is it about? He studied me for a long time, then said, it's about not being alone, about building something, however flawed. I can give you everything you've ever wanted. Freedom from debt, care for your mother, security, power. You don't have to say yes today, but don't say no because you're waiting for fairy tales. I wanted to scream, to throw the contract in his face, but I didn't, because a cruel part of me understood him. My whole life had been a series of closed doors, poverty, hardship, loneliness, and now someone was offering me a key. Yes, the key came with its own cage, but wasn't that better than constantly standing in the cold? I left the breakfast table without giving an answer. For days, I avoided him. I took long walks in the estate gardens, visited my mother more often, tried to remember who I was before all this. But every time I looked at the life I used to live, I couldn't unsee the truth. It was still a struggle, still uncertain, still exhausting. One evening, I returned late and found a small box waiting in my room. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, platinum band, no diamonds, no flair, just a tiny engraving inside. Truth is a luxury, choice is a gift. I held it for a long time. It was strange. He hadn't asked for love, hadn't offered it either, yet the gesture still felt personal, like he was offering not just a deal, but a kind of truce. A space where I could choose, truly choose what I wanted to become. And that's when I realized something important. Power isn't always taken. Sometimes it's signed for. So the next morning, I walked into his study. He stood by the window, reading something in French, and as I entered, his face unreadable as always. I have 2 conditions, I said, holding the contract. His eyebrow lifted just slightly. Go on. 1, my mother lives with us in Geneva, in a separate wing. You cover her care, but I oversee everything. Done. 2, I have full control of my own money. Any gifts, stipends, whatever you give me, I manage. He gave a faint smile. Isabella Rossi, making her own rules already. I'm not a possession, Sterling. His voice dropped to a whisper. I never thought you were. I signed the papers that afternoon. The marriage license was filed the next day. No wedding dress, no vows, just a sharp pen, cold ink, and a flick of the wrist. By law, we were husband and wife, but by heart, we were strangers. Strangers with secrets. That night, I sat in the master bedroom, staring out over the city. Somewhere behind me, he was finishing a phone call in another room. I could hear his voice, low, commanding, foreign in the context of this strange domestic scene. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Maybe this wasn't love, but it was war. And I was ready to play. 2 months after the paper marriage, we moved to Geneva. A mansion overlooking Lake Leman became our new home. Glass, steel, and silence. I had my own wing, my own staff, and a schedule designed by assistants I never met. My mother received the best care in a nearby facility, just as I had requested. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Mr. Sterling, now technically my husband, was rarely around. When he was, we exchanged pleasantries, signed documents, attended functions where I smiled on cue and played the part of the mysterious wife. I wore designer dresses and diamond earrings. But inside I was floating, weightless, untethered. A paper wife in a paper life. Then came the night of the gala. He hadn't invited me. The invitation was left on my dresser. It was written in gold foil. The Lenoir Foundation Annual Ball. Black tie. No +1 needed, because, of course, I was expected. That night, I wore a silver gown with a low back and high slit. Elegant. Dangerous. I wanted him to notice. I wanted to remind him that this was not a quiet agreement. I was here, breathing, watching. He greeted me at the entrance of the ballroom like I was just another guest. "You look stunning," he said, offering his arm. I took it, smiling. Try not to look too shocked. The evening passed in a blur of champagne and whispers. People kept calling him Sterling, never James. No one asked how we met. No one cared. It was all politics and strategy, like watching chess played with crystal pieces. At some point, I wandered off to a quiet hallway for air. That's when I heard them. Two men near the stairwell, speaking in rushed French. One of them mentioned Sterling's name. The other said something I didn't fully catch. But it was enough to stop me cold. Elle ne sait toujours pas? She still doesn't know? Know what? I turned, slowly walking back inside, the words pounding in my ears. When I found Sterling again, he was talking to an older man in a navy suit. His expression shifted slightly when he saw me. Something unreadable. Maybe guilt. Later that night, I confronted him. "What don't I know?" I asked as we stood in his study. The room smelled of oak and old books. He sipped whiskey and didn't flinch. "I don't like vague questions," he replied. I stepped closer. "At the gala, someone said I didn't know something. About you. About us." His jaw tightened. "People talk." "No, they whisper," I said, "because there's something to hide." A long silence. He stared at the fire burning in the hearth, the light flickering across his face. Then, quietly, "Isabella, our marriage was never supposed to be emotional. You agreed to that." "Yes," I snapped. But I didn't agree to be lied to. He finally looked at me. "There are things about my past that can't surface. Not because of shame, because of risk. People get hurt when secrets slip." I folded my arms, my heart racing. "So tell me, or I'll leave." His eyes darkened, not with anger, but fear. Not fear of losing me, fear of the truth itself. He walked to a drawer, opened it, and pulled out a thin folder. Handed it to me. Inside were two things, a photo and a death certificate. The photo showed a woman. Stunning, dark-haired, maybe in her early 30s. She looked familiar. Her eyes especially. There was a boy beside her, 5 or 6 years old, smiling. The name on the death certificate froze my breath. Sophia Rossi. Age 33. Cause of death unspecified trauma. My aunt. My mother's younger sister. The one we never talked about. The one who vanished when I was a child. "You knew her?" I asked, voice trembling. He nodded slowly. "She was my wife before you." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the folder. "She married you?" He sat down, fingers interlaced. "We met in Paris. She was fiery, brilliant. Your mother disapproved. Thought I was dangerous. Maybe she was right." "What happened to her?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he said, "She died trying to leave me. There was a car crash, but it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to hurt me and used her to do it." I stared at the flames again. My stomach twisted. "You married me, knowing who I was?" I whispered. "Yes," he said, "because I knew no one would come for you the way they came for her. I could protect you." I shook my head. "Or control me." He stood and crossed to me. "I never meant for you to become part of this, but I couldn't let you walk away once I saw you. You reminded me of her courage, her anger, her beauty, and yes, her recklessness." Tears blurred my vision. "You used me. I tried to save you." I stepped back. "You failed." And I left the room, slamming the door behind me. For the first time since I met Mr. Sterling, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt betrayed. For months, Isabella had lived inside the golden cage of the Sterling mansion, playing the perfect wife, offering quiet smiles and soft nods during dinner parties. But inside her, something was shifting. The fog of glamour had begun to clear, replaced by a sharper, colder awareness. Mr. Sterling was never careless, but he was confident, and that was his weakness. One evening, while he was away on a sudden business trip to Geneva, Isabella entered his private study. She had never been allowed in there before. He told her it was where real work happened, and that she wouldn't find it interesting. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the study was dimly lit by warm sconces and decorated with leather-bound books and oil paintings, symbols of wealth and permanence. But it was the desk drawer that caught her attention. It wasn't locked either. Inside, she found documents, not of love or business, but of concealment. Financial records, shell companies, transfers to accounts under names she didn't recognize. Names that weren't his. Some had her name too. Isabella Sterling, listed as the legal owner of a tech company in Singapore, another firm in Dubai. She sank into the chair, her fingers trembling. These weren't just company assets. They were fronts, designed to hide something, maybe something illegal. That night, as the rain tapped against the tall windows, Isabella sat in bed, the laptop open beside her. She searched for answers, but what she found only deepened the mystery. The company registered in Singapore had been involved in several lawsuits over data privacy. The Dubai entity had been fined for labor violations. She was legally listed as the CEO in 2 of them. A chill ran down her spine. The next morning, she reached out to someone she never thought she'd need. Samir Park, a private investigator. She had met him months ago at one of the estate's charity functions. Quiet, observant, and polite, he had handed her his card with a knowing smile. She still had it in her drawer. "Mrs. Sterling?" Samir greeted her when they met in a quiet cafe across town. "Or should I say, CEO of more companies than you realize." She exhaled, the sound hollow. "I need to know what he's hiding, and what he's hiding in my name." Samir nodded. "Then you've come to the right person." Over the next several weeks, Isabella lived a double life. In public, she remained poised, hosting dinners, attending fashion galas, clinging to Mr. Sterling's arm like nothing had changed. But behind closed doors, she devoured every document Samir sent her. What she learned shook her. Mr. Sterling's empire was held up by smoke and mirrors. Real estate deals backed by dirty money, political favors purchased through discreet donations, and the companies in her name were legal shields. So if things ever went south, she'd be the fall person. "Why me?" she asked Samir during one call. "Because you were convenient. You had no money, no power, and no voice. He thought you'd never question it." Those words stayed with her. But Mr. Sterling had made a mistake. In trying to choose someone weak, he had underestimated her. Isabella began to prepare. She hired a lawyer, discreetly, through a friend of Samir's in another city. She started attending business workshops under the pretense of self-improvement. But really, she was learning the language of power. Contracts, ownership, liability. She wanted to understand every trap he had set for her. Her silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Mr. Sterling looked at her with those gray eyes that once mesmerized her. "You've changed," he said softly. "I'm just growing into who I was meant to be," she replied with a smile. He seemed satisfied with that answer. Inside, she burned. She didn't hate him. Not yet. There was still a small, foolish part of her that remembered the man who bought her mother's medicine without blinking, who once made her laugh in a private jet over Vienna. But kindness wrapped in manipulation was still poison. And Isabella had finally learned how to taste it. Samir's final report came a month later. It was everything she feared, and more. Offshore accounts, blackmail trails, even bribes to local politicians. Isabella Sterling was unknowingly the face of a criminal empire, and now she knew everything. She stood before the mirror that night, wearing a velvet gown for another one of Sterling's galas. She stared at the woman reflected back, no longer the frightened girl from a diner in Queens, but someone reborn. Isabella didn't cry anymore. She planned. She had let him pull her into his world. Now she would learn to take it apart. By the time the winter gala arrived, Isabella Rossi had already made her decision. The estate was dressed in crystal lights, jazz music floating through the halls, and guests in diamonds and silk sipping champagne as if the world outside didn't exist. But inside Isabella, a storm had already formed. She had a plan now. Not just for escape, for justice. It had started quietly, like most revolutions do. A new phone under a false name. A secure storage unit in the Bronx, where she kept duplicates of every incriminating document Samir had found. A legal team, hired discreetly through layers of confidentiality agreements. She didn't trust anyone who smiled too quickly anymore. Every morning, she woke up beside Mr. Sterling and pretended. She kissed his cheek. She complimented his tie. She sat at breakfast reading fashion magazines while he read the Wall Street Journal. And when he left for work, she got to work too. Learning, preparing, building her case. Samir had warned her. If you move too soon, he'll bury you before the court ever hears your name. "I know," she'd replied. That's why I won't move too soon. Her plan was simple, but it had to be flawless. Step 1. Isolate financial evidence that directly tied Mr. Bra's Sterling to his shell companies without implicating herself. Step 2. File a whistleblower report through an offshore legal channel, one that allowed anonymous disclosures with legal protection. Step 3. Make sure her mother was safely out of the country, just in case. Her mother was the only family she had. Getting her out was the hardest part. Isabella told her she was sending her on a luxury spa retreat in Switzerland, a gift for everything she had sacrificed. She didn't explain further. The less her mother knew, the safer she would be. Isabella, her mother had said tearfully before boarding the flight, I always knew you were strong. She had smiled then, but barely. I didn't know until recently. Back at the estate, the illusion remained intact. Mr. Sterling was as charming and controlled as ever, but Isabella could feel it, a growing tension like glass under pressure. One wrong move and everything would shatter. One night, while they were alone in the study, a place she now entered freely, Mr. Sterling looked up from a document and said, You've become more confident lately. I like it. She met his gaze evenly. And you taught me how to survive, didn't you? He smiled. I did. Maybe I've created a monster. She laughed, but the laugh didn't reach her eyes. Maybe he had. She couldn't afford to wait much longer. Whispers in financial circles had already begun. One of Mr. Sterling's shell companies was under investigation overseas. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. The final piece of her plan came in the form of an invitation, a private meeting with a U.S. attorney specializing in white-collar crime. Through Samir's network, she arranged it quietly, in a federal building under a different name. She walked in alone, in a simple trench coat and flats. No makeup, no jewelry. She handed over the evidence. 3 hours later, she walked out with a deal. Full cooperation, limited immunity. She would testify, and in return, the charges against her as a false CEO would be dropped. She'd even get part of the asset seizure reward, enough to rebuild her life. That night, back in her grand bedroom with silk sheets and imported candles, Isabella stared at the ceiling and let herself breathe for the first time in months. She wasn't free yet, but she was close. At the gala, Isabella played her part perfectly. She stood beside Mr. Sterling, dazzling in a crimson gown, smiling for photographers. She laughed with senators, flirted with hedge fund managers, and toasted to a beautiful year ahead. But in her clutch, she carried a flash drive, the last copy of her files, just in case everything went wrong. As the night wore on, Sterling leaned in and whispered, I'm taking you to the Caymans next week, just the two of us. No distractions. Her stomach tightened. That was not part of the plan. She kissed his cheek and said, I'd love that. But her mind was racing. He was changing something. Was he suspicious? Had someone spoken? Or was this just another luxury gift meant to keep her quiet? Back in their suite, as he slipped into bed beside her, Isabella lay awake, eyes wide in the dark. She had already started the machine. The moment she handed over the documents, there was no turning back. Now, she just had to survive the fallout. The jet touched down in Grand Cayman just after sunset. The sky was stained with gold, and the ocean shimmered below like melted glass. Isabella stepped out of the sleek private plane and into the warm Caribbean air with a calm she had spent weeks practicing. Mr. Sterling walked beside her, sunglasses on, his presence as commanding as ever. I thought you'd like this little escape, he said with a smirk, after everything we've handled this year. Isabella smiled, gently. I think I need it. But in truth, she didn't come here to relax. She came here to end it. They checked into a private beachfront villa hidden behind towering palms and guarded gates. It was the kind of place billionaires used when they didn't want to be found. Isabella had always thought of places like this as a fantasy. Now she saw them for what they really were. Hideouts. Places for men like Sterling to disappear when the law got too close. Inside the villa, there were no cameras, no staff unless summoned, no one to witness what might happen. That night, they had dinner by candlelight. Sterling poured wine and spoke about mergers, currency fluctuations, and a potential crypto expansion, but Isabella barely heard him. Her thoughts were with her mother, safe in Switzerland, with Samir watching the headlines for her signal, with the prosecutor in New York waiting for her call. Sterling reached across the table and took her hand. You've been quiet, he said. She blinked. Just thinking. His expression darkened slightly. You've changed. I had to. He leaned back in his chair. Tell me, Isabella, have you been loyal? Her heart skipped. This was it, the moment she'd feared. She swallowed. What do you mean? He tapped the rim of his wine glass. Someone's been leaking documents. Files no one should have. Files that lead back to me. But only a few people had access. You, Samir, and me. She didn't flinch. You think I'd betray you? Sterling stood slowly. You're smart, Isabella, and I admire that, but you weren't supposed to get too smart. He walked around the table and stopped beside her. Do you love me? She looked up at him, and for a split second, the truth was there, sharp and brutal. I did, she said softly, until I saw what you really were. His hand tightened around the back of her chair. You used me. You used me, she said, rising. Her voice didn't tremble. You took a desperate girl with a sick mother and turned her into your front. You lied, you manipulated, and you hid behind my name while you committed fraud around the world. His expression twisted. You wouldn't have anything if not for me. I'd still have myself, she said, which is more than I can say for you. He moved quickly then, grabbing her wrist. What did you do, Isabella? She looked him dead in the eyes. I turned you in. The words landed like a gunshot. For a beat, the only sound was the waves crashing beyond the balcony. He stared at her, stunned. Then he laughed, low and cold. You have no idea what you've done? You think the law will protect you? You think I haven't prepared for this? I don't care, she whispered. Let them come for me, but they'll come for you first. He shoved her away, and she stumbled back against the table. You think you're better than me? You were nothing when I found you. A waitress, a nobody. And you're a criminal, she said, lifting her chin. And soon the world will know. Sterling stepped closer again, but this time Isabella reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a weapon, just her phone. She hit a button. Everything we just said, she said calmly, was recorded. His face froze. It's already uploaded, she added. Encrypted, sent to the feds. You can't stop it. For the first time, Sterling looked afraid. The power he'd held over her for so long cracked in an instant. He reached for her, not violently, but desperately. Isabella, we can fix this. We can leave, together. There's still time. No, she said. You don't get to rewrite the ending. Sirens pierced the quiet of the night. It was faint at first, but growing louder. The private security Sterling had paid for wouldn't stop what was coming. Not this time. She stepped away from him as red and blue lights flashed outside the villa's walls. You ruined me, he said bitterly. No, she said, meeting his gaze one last time. You did that to yourself. When federal agents stormed the villa minutes later, Isabella didn't run. She walked calmly down the steps, hands visible, her chin lifted. As they cuffed Mr. Tadaf Sterling and rid him his rights, she stood alone in the humid Caribbean night, the sea behind her and a new beginning ahead. She was free. At last. The plane soared above the clouds, slicing through the sky like a blade. Isabella leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't surviving. She was free. Below her, Grand Cayman faded into memory, the place where it all ended. Or maybe the place where it all began again. Mr. Sterling had been taken away in handcuffs. The headlines exploded within hours. Tech billionaire arrested in offshore fraud scandal. Whistleblower identified as former protégé Isabella Rossi. Some articles painted her as a villain turned hero. Others questioned her motives. But Isabella didn't care. Let them talk. She knew her truth. And that was enough. By the time she landed in New York, the world had changed. Her name was in every major paper. She had lawyers waiting, interviews scheduled, and a federal deal that ensured her protection. She would testify. She would reveal everything. And in return, she wouldn't go to prison. But she didn't just want freedom. She wanted power, and she was finally ready to claim it. Isabella walked into her apartment, the one she'd bought under a new LLC, clean and legal. No more shell companies, no more lies, just hard-won, honest ownership. The space was minimal, sleek, and filled with light. The first thing she did was open all the windows. She sat down at the desk overlooking the city skyline. Below her, the streets of Manhattan buzzed with people chasing things, dreams, money, validation. She chased all three and lost herself in the process. But now Now, she'd earned the right to pause. The next morning, she met with the Justice Department. They didn't expect her to be so composed. A young woman in a black suit, hair pulled back, voice calm and precise. She handed over files, passwords, offshore account details. Every skeleton Sterling had tried to hide, she dragged into the light. "You built this empire," one agent remarked, "and now you're tearing it down." She met his gaze. "I'm not tearing it down. I'm building something new." With the investigation behind her and Sterling awaiting trial, Isabella turned to what came next. She wasn't going back to being invisible. She launched a consulting firm, but not the kind that played the old game. Her new company specialized in helping victims of white-collar manipulation, young professionals caught in powerful men's schemes, whistleblowers too scared to speak, tech employees forced to sign NDAs and silence. She called it Catalyst. In less than 3 months, Catalyst had gone viral. People admired the woman who'd taken down a billionaire and now used her knowledge to help others. The same news outlets that once speculated about her downfall now invited her for interviews. Forbes called her the woman who burned the mansion down and built a skyscraper from the ashes. But fame didn't seduce her. She stayed grounded. She called her mother every night. She paid for a medical team that gave her mom the best care in Europe. Samir came back into her life, not as a co-conspirator, but as a partner in something honest. He helped her manage Catalyst's finances, and though they never labeled what they were, something between them quietly healed. One evening, months after Sterling's arrest, Isabella stood alone on a rooftop in Brooklyn, watching the city lights flicker. She remembered the girl she used to be, 25, exhausted, desperate, chasing tips and dodging bills. She remembered the first time she stepped into a world of money and illusion, believing it would save her. And she remembered the cost. "I made it," she whispered to the wind. Not because of what she'd taken, but because of what she'd chosen to give back. The power she had now wasn't built on secrets. It wasn't borrowed from men in suits. It was hers. It came from the truth, and no one could take that from her. Months later, Isabella was invited to speak at a global tech conference. The keynote speaker before her was a billionaire AI founder, polished, charming, just like Sterling had been. When she took the stage, there was a moment of silence. Then thunderous applause. She looked out over the crowd. Executives, coders, journalists. Some had doubted her. Some had feared her. All of them were listening now. "My name is Isabella Rossi," she began, her voice strong and clear. "I spent years living in someone else's shadow. I thought success meant being near power. But real power, the kind that doesn't vanish when the spotlight moves, comes from knowing who you are and standing up even when you're scared." She paused. "I was used, lied to, controlled, and I almost lost myself trying to survive it. But I took back my story, and I'll spend the rest of my life helping others do the same." Another pause. Freedom isn't the end goal, it's the beginning. The room rose to their feet, and Isabella, no longer anyone's secret, no longer anyone's pawn, smiled. She was free, and she was powerful.